Good evening, folks. Wow, pretty good turnout for August. I'm impressed. Thank you all for coming. As usual, we'll start off with our Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to ask Pete to come up and lead us in it. He's the son of our speaker tonight. Pete, would you?
Yes, I will. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Nice to see you all standing. Let me start off on a low note. A good friend of ours who has spoken to us and has been here many times and whatnot, Frank Lashinsky, passed away, 91 years old. He's just a good guy, like all of you guys are. He's just a good one, and I'm just so sorry to see him go. But we all will sooner or later, and that's that. But tail gunner, knew it, you did it all. So, farewell, rest in peace. I'm usually guilty of one of my cell phone on, so let's all turn them off if we have them on. And I'd like to welcome the first timers. And I know there are some because Pete here is one. So for the first timers, please show us who you are. Oh, terrific. Terrific. Thanks for coming. If you enjoyed, please come back next month. And for you first timers, just so you know, we probably have more World War II veterans here than we have first timers. So look around and the World War II veterans raise their hand. I love it. As usual, there'll probably be somebody in the house who isn't getting or would like to get an email or a postcard alerting them to the next meeting. If you haven't and you want to, in the back, out front, is a little card that you can write your name at, your email address. We prefer email, but either way, we'll make sure you get the notifications. A few announcements. Richard Burton. Birth to Richard. What have you been doing lately, Richard?
So I and a bunch of other Vietnam veterans run a Vietnam roundtable, and we meet the second Thursday of every month at 8000 Dairy Street, the Vietnam Veterans Hall, and we run a oral history project very similar to this, and it's for Vietnam veterans. And coming up next Thursday, thanks to the soon-to-be 82-year-old Bill Jackson, just returning from his 6-month sabbatical from Cancun. He would, of course, like to thank everybody who donated to his vacation. So, thank you. Anyway, Tom Davis, a local from here in Hershey area, who was a Navy surgeon. So he's going to talk this next coming Thursday at 7:30 at 8000 Dairy Street, and then in October, Rich Flegel from Camp Hill. He was in the field artillery attached to the 1st Air Cav Division. So that's a Vietnam roundtable. And then four times a year, Charlie Lloyd and I go to the Veterans Expos. There's one in Newark and Reading. And last week we were over the Radisson, and Charlie took Steve Busan over there. Now Steve's 94. He was in 3 wars. So Steve was there, and at the end of the day, this lady came up to us and said, "I'd like to give this to Steve," and it's a very nice keychain, key fob, whatever you want to call it. And Charlie, being the born salesman, said, "Hey, we have a World War II meeting coming up next week, meeting tonight. Do you have any extras?" So she gave us like 15. And then at the very, very end of the day, around 2 o'clock when we were all leaving, she comes over to us and says, "Here, why don't you take the rest of these?" I said, "Well, we'll give them out to World War II, and then I'll give them out to Vietnam next week." So anybody who's a veteran who tells me they're a veteran, first come, first served, I have about 25 or so of these key fobs left, and they're not junk. So if you want one, come and see me at the end of the meeting. So it's it's first come, first served.
Good. Thanks, Rich. Ricky Hollis, you here? Yep. There's Ricky talking about the Civil War.
Hello. This is for the Hershey Civil War Roundtable. We meet the following Thursday at Country Meadows, and our speaker for this month is going to be Ed Baumkeeper. His topic's the best of blue and the gray, and we meet at 7:30 at Country Meadows in Hershey. And also we have next month, assuming in October, we have a field trip coming up, and it's going to be at Gettysburg. It's going to be the East and South Cavalry Battlefields by J.D. Petrosi. If anybody knows, he's written several books on the cavalry, so if anybody's interested, just let me know, because I don't have the flyers, but I do have some business cards in the back with Rich's table that has my email address, so if you could send it to me, I'd appreciate it. And it's open to anybody who wants to come. Thank you.
Anybody from the War of 1812? No veterans from 1812, okay. Most important reminder, if you don't know, our helmet committee will be happy to greet you as you leave this evening and accept your gratuity. It helps keep us going. We thank you very much. Are there any other announcements, Laura? Do you have anything? Or no? Anybody need a headset? Hearing enhancer? You all set? Okay, good. All right, I have a quiz. Quiz for the day. What two neighboring memorials mark the beginning and end of U.S. involvement in World War II? What two neighboring memorials mark the beginning and end of U.S. involvement in World War II? Somebody knew it? How many hands know it? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. For those who don't know it, it happens to be the USS Arizona and the USS Missouri nearby each other at Pearl Harbor. It's a pretty good trivia question. And I'm happy to see how many know it. You must watch Jeopardy or something. You think I make this stuff up? Okay, last month, August, we talked a lot about what happened in August of 1943 with the battles of the Pacific. And that was pretty interesting stuff, as you know. In fact, this evening a gentleman came up and said he was there too, but we'll have to get him to talk. But let's talk what happened in August of 1945. I'm going to go back a little bit. This is barely September, so I'll finish up on August. On August 6, 1945, the bomber Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb, little boy, on Hiroshima. August 6th. By the way, Enola Gay, you probably know, Colonel Tibbets's mother's name was Gay, and she was from Enola, Pennsylvania, hence the name of the plane. On the 8th, talk about good timing, on the 8th, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. Now we knocked the crap out of them, they declared war. And they invaded Manchuria about an hour later and landed in the Kuril Islands. And there are a whole string of islands that is between the north side of Japan all the way up to Russia. So they got in just about in time. On the 9th, the B-29 bomber Boxcar, named after his pilot, Mr. Bach, and that was his car. The Boxcar dropped the second atomic bomb, Fat Man, on Nagasaki. And on that date, it was the last day the United States forced the United States' combat actions. All units are frozen in place. And then the next week, on the 15th, Emperor Hirohito issued a radio broadcast announcing the surrender of Japan. Victory over Japan, VJ Day celebration took place worldwide. It didn't end there though, because the Japanese were still at war with in a lot of other places that didn't get the word, so it went on for a good part of the rest of the month in various places. There were just too many to talk about at night. But the point of the story is, on the 17th, on the 16th, after admitting defeat, on the 16th, he issued an imperial order to the Japanese forces to cease fire everywhere, and it still took them a few days to get the word in other places. On the 17th, General Order Number 1, approved by President Truman for the surrender of Japan. Like it took an executive order for that. And on the 31st, he came back, General MacArthur took over command of the Japanese government in Tokyo. So that's what that concluded August. But meanwhile, Rich, you'll be interested in this. Back to the 19th of August, at a spontaneous non-communist meeting in Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh assumed a leading role in the government to wrest control and power from the French. With the Japanese still in control of Indochina in the interim, Bao Dai, who was the last king of Vietnam of the Nguyen family, he goes along with it because he thought that the Viet Minh were still working with the American OSS and could guarantee the independence for Vietnam. And of course later, Ho Chi Minh's guerrillas occupied Hanoi and took over and proclaimed the provisional government. That was August. September 2nd, 71 years ago tomorrow, the Japanese instrument of surrender is signed on the deck of the USS Missouri. We'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. At the same time, the same day, Ho Chi Minh issued a proclamation of independence, which he drew heavily from the American Declaration of Independence from a copy provided by the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. He used that as his template for his Declaration of Independence. Ho declares himself the President of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam and pursues American recognition, but is repeatedly ignored by President Truman. And you sort of have to ask yourself, what if? But that's history. So, it was signed on the deck of the Missouri, and Cliff will show you a little bit more about that. Can you see up there? Amen to that. I apologize for the audio, but the pictures sure told it all, didn't they? And you gotta feel badly for the folks at the end of the Korean conflict and the Vietnam conflict and others who didn't get the same recognition and that these folks do. But, not to denigrate their activities, I'll tell you what, it was a big one, so thank you all for serving. Now, for your entertainment pleasure, it's Charlie Lloyd time. Where's Charlie?
Over here.
There he is. He got a bunch of stuff to talk to, and then we'll get to the heart of the matter.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. A nice turnout for a holiday weekend. Appreciate that. We did have, I noticed we had some World War II vets for the first time. I'd like to have them raise their hand so we can recognize them.
My name is Chuck Klein. I'm from Harrisburg, and I was in the South Pacific, 1944, 1946, and made 5 landings. First one in New Guinea, three in the Philippines, and 1 in Borneo.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm going to do that. The reason I went to Chuck Klein first is because we had a speaker here last year. You might remember Nathan Klein, who flew navigated bombardier on a Marauder B-26. And he came in from Allentown dressed in his uniform, and he gave a nice speech. Well, we're always looking for speakers, right? Well, just recently, Nathan mentions to our guy in Allentown, oh, my cousin was in the war. All this... Uncle was in the war. He's your uncle. You're the nephew, right?
No, he's older than I am by 2 years, but I'm his uncle.
You're the uncle. You look a lot younger than him. Clean living. So it spreads from there. But we had a couple back here that didn't. Okay. If we have anyone out, here's one here. Sir, may we ask you?
He was at D-Day on a different ship.
Okay.
Well, he was on a destroyer that serviced and hauled troops to the LCIs. And then the LCIs took them inshore and delivered them to the Higgins boats. And from there on, things got hot. One of the things that destroyers did out of necessity was to shoot 5-inch shells onto the German pillboxes, etc., that were wreaking havoc to our men crawling up out of the surf. That was invaluable. It was, however, we planned the thing to have, I think, about 40-some amphibious tanks to go in and provide artillery support. Unfortunately, the design did not reckon with the waves, and I think about 38 of them sank with their crews. But additional artillery was required, and destroyers like my friend John's were there to do the job.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your service. I see a new face back here, too. Wayne, is this your first time? No. Oh, okay. I just want to get the first timers. Anybody I missed? Oh, there's one back here. We got to recognize all our veterans, and this is the first time we want to make sure you get recognized while you're here. So bear with me. Thank you. Here we go. You're going to be the center of attention here for all 5 minutes.
My name is Al Lysy.
and I'm from the Masonic Village over here in Elizabethtown. My hometown is Honeybrook. So you people going down 322. Well, I had a time. I was at Penn State, a freshman, and war broke out. And we all were sure that we were going into the war. And we did. And I went in the Marine Corps. 22nd Marines, 6th Marine Division, Guadalcanal, Marshall Islands, 5 of them, and a WWII. I was wounded twice in the same day. And I spent a year or 2 years in a naval hospital. It was a great privilege to serve, even though I didn't know what I was doing from the point of view of saying I wanted to go into the Marines. I'm out there in Samoa after Guadalcanal. I met Eleanor Roosevelt out there looking after her son, Jimmy, who was my commanding officer in the Marine Raiders. I have no idea how she found me in that hospital out there and sat down and talked to me for a few minutes. So I had a great time. I really did.
Thank you for your credit. I think you had one back here. You might want to say hello. Rich, this is your dad. Your name? Research.
My name is John Dollars. I served in China, Burma, India, North Africa. I was with the 83rd Squadron, 12th Bombardment Group. Yeah, what else?
Thank you very much for your service. You want to say something else?
Yeah, we gave money, General Monty, they called him Monty, the British general in North Africa. We gave him air support to in North Africa there, and then they deployed us to India, and we helped the Japanese there. I don't know what general was there. They had a half a dozen different generals.
Thank you very much for your service. We appreciate it, sir. It's nice to have new people coming. And here's one hiding from me. Benjamin, World War II. Say hello. Say hello to our guests. Where did you serve?
Where I served was in the Pacific, in Leyte, and I saw the Great One twice with the corncob pipe, and I shall never experience such a sight in my life.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you for your service. Now get back to Leyte. We had a speaker went to Leyte Golf. Matt Dubman, he was there. No, that's one before now. That's from top of the list. Part of the operation here is to find, locate, and vet veterans so they can come and share their stories with us, because we're losing these guys and we got to get the stories out. I got a call this week, actually got an email and a call from Pennsylvania Cable Network. And about 10 or 15 years ago, they did a series called In Their Own Words. And they would like to come and work with us and have our veterans interviewed in their homes. So they would come to your house and anyone out here wants to be a television star, just let us know. I don't think there's any big money in it, but we're just starting to have that dialogue so we can get together and build those synergies. So we're pretty excited about that. Take up a lot of time and I'll move along. Our speaker next month is Ivan Backer. He's coming here from Hartford, Connecticut. He was a 10-year-old Jewish boy on the next to the last train out of Poland. This fellow named Nicholas Winton. And he figured out how to get children out. And he had 250 on train cars. And they had 6 or 7 cars, I guess. He had a total of 700 or 800 kids that got out before the curtain fell. Ivan ended up, in fact, he told me he watched his aunt screaming at his mother because she was putting him on a train and telling her, you're crazy, you'll never see him again. But she saw the future, and she got him out. So he ended up in England, boarding schools, and changed from the Jewish faith to the Episcopalian faith and became a priest. And he'll be sharing his story next month with us. We're going to Hartford, and Bob Watkins is going to give a tour of Gettysburg. And then we have Herb Rigger from Al down your way in Masonic Homes. He's going to come and speak in November on his experiences in the war. In December, we got David Lamal coming. He was a B-29 tail gunner through several missions, and he has quite a story. And then we have a guy, Whitman, who's coming in January with an equally strong story. So we have a pretty strong slate of speakers coming up. We appreciate your attendance. And for the fellows that are here, we certainly appreciate your service. Harold Billows here. The last survivor of the Malmedy Massacre, sitting in the front row. May I ask you a personal question? Now, I know you married an English girl, and you brought her here. You lost her about 10 years ago. 08. You still have all those Hooter calendars on your wall? I've been there. Thank you for coming, Harold.
Now we'd like to have Charlie introduce our guest speaker tonight, and thank you for coming. So, at the end of which, we'll have a couple closing remarks and then ask for questions and answers, and we'll have a translator for you as well. So that's what we're going to do. Charlie?
I thought you spoke English. Are you a translator? Guys and girls, we've got Keith Fantacone with us, who I met in Reading. In fact, he agreed to come to speak to us in June. Now, you know his background. He was on LCI in Normandy. Smallest ship in the Navy? Yeah, landing craft infantry. Pretty nasty place to be. First day in Normandy. But as we talked, he said, well, I can't talk. I'm going to be at World War II weekend. I said, we'll be there too. So we had to push that off and finally get him here. So it's a Normandy guy speaking a couple months after June, but I think you'll really enjoy the story he has to share. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Pete Fantacone from Mays Landing, New Jersey.
Good evening, everybody. Charlie told me to be a nice crowd here tonight, and he certainly was right. It's my pleasure to address you tonight and tell you the story of Normandy. I give these talks to honor and remember those who died during the invasion of Normandy. On D-Day, June the 6th, 1944, there would sail from England to the Normandy coast, the greatest armada in history, that would challenge Hitler's fortress Europe. Of the 5,000 ships and thousands of men involved, this is the story of the men in the first waves who would hit the beach of Normandy on D-Day. Casualties would be high, and thousands would not see the end of day. Fortress Europe would be preached by the heroism, the pain, and the supreme sacrifice of these men in the first waves. Through this breach, literally thousands of men would fiercely battle their way to Germany to victory in Europe. So sit back now as we set sail with Coast Guard Flotilla 10 aboard the USS LCI 492 into a beach called Omaha on the Normandy coast. This account of D-Day is given in the first person, but I wish to acknowledge the other officers and members of the crew who also sailed in the USS LCI 492. LCI, by the way, stands for Landing Craft Infantry. And they witnessed and experienced the events in the following narrative. The invasion of Normandy on D-Day. Norbert Panning was our captain. K.R. Lavoie, executive officer. Joseph Weber, engineering officer. Stan Nelson from Andover, Minnesota, communication officer. Jack Claiborne, our helmsman, was from Dyersburg, Tennessee. Morgan Bowman from Shelby, North Carolina. Tom Cooper, quartermaster from New Jersey. Robert Harris from Reedyville, Tennessee. Jim Reichsnyder from Pennsylvania. Russ Darling, radioman from Pennsylvania. Dan Pacouche from upstate New York. Clarence Smith. And Matty Grandinetti, a gunner's mate from Brooklyn. Ralph Weaver, William Muldoon, Singleman from Manchester, Connecticut. So you see our crew is made up of men from all over the country. It was the end of May 1944. I reported aboard USS LCI 492 a couple of weeks prior to D-Day on June the 6th, 1944. This is my first look at a landing craft infantry. The LCI is the smallest ocean-going ship in the Navy. She carried a crew of 24 enlisted men and 4 officers, with a troop carrying capacity of about 200 troops. She was 158 feet long, with a 24-foot beam. With her flat bottom, we discharged our troops directly on the beach. Troops would disembark on 2 ramps, more similar to gangplanks, which were lowered on each side of the bow, going forward directly down into the beach. The place was the seaport town of Weymouth on the southern coast of England. The LCI 492, along with other LCIs of Flotilla 10, were tied up in a pier, 3 or 4 abreast. The LCI 492 was outboard, which necessitated we cross over 2 or 3 LCIs if we wanted to go onto the pier. Flotilla 10 was made up of Coast Guard LCIs, basically. There was some Navy. The LCI 492, the one I was on, was a Navy LCI. The Coast Guard LCIs were battle hardened, having made landings in Anzio, Sicily, and Salerno. Their campaign ribbons and battle stars were painted on their con. The LCIs 85 and 87 were 2 of them. Darkness fell about 11 p.m. or midnight. And about this time each night, prior to the invasion, general quarters would be sounded as the Germans made their nightly bombing run on our port. The LCIs would immediately head out of the harbor for open water. My station was below deck, and I could hear the fire at 20 millimeters and then explosions around us. After a while, we secured from general quarters and head back to the pier. Fortunately, our ships suffered no casualties during the nightly raids, but it kept us from getting a good night's sleep, because by the time we secured from general quarters, it was about 0400. On coming back to the ship from a short daytime liberty, about 3 p.m. on June 3rd or 4th, I found a complete pier area and ships crowded with soldiers. I had to work my way through the troops and their equipment on inboard LCIs until I got to my ship. We were loaded with troops. To me, it seemed something big was about to happen. But my shipmates, who had been on the LCI for some time, assured me it was just another practice run, one of the many they had experienced over the months. Later in the afternoon of June the 5th, it was announced there would be a Catholic Mass on the docks for all those who wanted to attend. At Mass time, the dock was packed with soldiers and sailors, so much so they spilled over onto the ships. I think every soldier and sailor from those ships was at Mass that afternoon. When the chaplain gave general absolution, I knew then this was a sure sign this was not another practice run. At approximately 1700, special sea detail was set, and we got underway from our pier in Weymouth, England. As we left the harbor, we sailed past Portland Bill that jutted out into the English Channel. The weather was dull and gray, and the sea was rough, and we were taking spray over the bow. I looked out as we reached the open sea, and I saw ships and more ships, landing craft, patrol craft, troop transports, breaking through the seas, and all heading for France. At this time, I recall General Eisenhower's order of the day, which was given over the loudspeaker on the ships. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hope and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, your devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing short of victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. Flotilla 10 had the USS LCI 87 leading the starboard column, 492 leading the middle column, and the LCI 408 leading the port column. The LCI 492 acting as headquarters ship, set their course for France. I remember on this trip, my stomach didn't feel the greatest. I just got on the ship, the landlocked, right? My stomach didn't feel the greatest. With the rough seas, the flat bottom, most of all the smell of diesel fumes, since we must have had a falling wind and the fumes kept blowing forward from the stern forward for the whole trip. After sailing all night, we arrived off the coast of Normandy early in the morning of June 6th, about 0300, and began circling in the Congo area. June 6th was a dull gray day with rough choppy seas. About 0500, battleships Texas and Arkansas were unleashed and a tremendous barrage of firepower from their 14 and 12-inch guns. The cruisers Tuscaloosa, the Augusta, and the Quincy, and other ships would join in firing at positions on the beach. I was stationed at the bow of the ship as we circled in the assault area, manning a radio and listening to communications when the first wave landed on Omaha Beach at 0630. All I kept hearing on the radio were garbled words such as easy green, dog red, dog white, dog green, which later turned out to be the code names for the beach area where the landings were taking place. Spray was coming over the bow so much, the paper pad I was writing on was useless from getting wet. The LCIs of Flotilla 10, including the 492, we were assigned to land our troops on Omaha Beach. The tides of Normandy were tremendous length, since the Germans had all kinds of obstacles on the beach to stop, impale, and blow up the landing craft. We were landed at low tide in order to avoid these obstacles. However, the problem was that the dead and wounded would be engulfed as the tide came in and would be floating around in the water, and this we witnessed. LCI 492 hit the beach of Omaha Beach a short time after the first wave. I remember when looking at the beach, there was much smoke and wreckage of equipment burning on the beach. Bill Muldoon, he was our signalman on the 492, and he was stationed above deck, and he witnessed firsthand the destruction and carnage as he watched 200 soldiers jump from the ship and run past the bodies of their fallen comrades that are almost certain death. Countless bodies of soldiers who have been cut down by the Germans lay their smoldering equipment. After discharging our troops, we backed off the beach and pursued it back to the Sept area just off of Omaha. Coast Guard LCI 91 headed into Omaha Beach about 0740, carrying the alternate headquarters of the 116th Infantry. The 91 carefully maneuvered around stakes and beach obstacles and got 75 yards from shore before grounding the vessel for truce disembarkation. The 91 moved forward as the load lightened and the tide rose until the tide swung the bow into stakes with teller lines attached. One exploded, damaging the port bow. With some 60 troops still aboard, the 91 retracted and sought another beaching spot. The rams dropped into the water. As some officers led the way off, an artillery shell or rocket hit the crowded forward deck and set up a sheet of flame. Burning men jumped or fell off into the sea and tried to swim in under artillery and small arms fire. It's estimated that no personnel escaped from the #1 compartment. Then German 88s from shore blasted into the 91's well deck and exploded in the fuel tanks below, engulfing the ship in flames. So we couldn't fight engulfing the ship in flames. The order was given reluctantly to abandon ship. Survivors waded to the beach or were picked up by small landing craft, but the 91 could be seen burning all day. When the Coast Guard LCI 92 took her 192 troops into Omaha, she found the LCI 91 in flames and landed in her lee. In her lee, to use her smoke as a screen. The 92 approached under heavy machine gun fire, rifle and German shell fire. As they came in toward the beach, 100 yards from shore, they hit a submerged mine that killed most of the soldiers in the forward compartment. The explosion on her port side rocked the ship, starting a fire and spraying the forward deck with fuel oil. The crew battled the flames. Then a shell from the German batteries on shore exploded aboard. Aground, she started to unload troops under heavy rifle and machine gun fire. After all those killed from the explosion were ashore, those who were lifted up or went ashore, an attempt was made to retract the fire. To retract the fire was in and gaining, and the order was given reluctantly to abandon the LCI 92. Coast Guard LCI 85 approached Omaha Beach. The crew heard repeated thuds against the ship's hull, while the wood stakes covered the beach like a man-made forest. No clear channel existed where the commanding officer's charts indicated there would be. So he ordered the landing craft straight through the obstacles that had been covered by the incoming tide. The bow touched bottom, and the ship ground to a halt. A mine exploded and ripped a gaping hole in the forward compartment, and then German batteries pummeled the LCI numerous times. Many of the troops on board were torn to pieces before they ever got off the ship. Those who were still able to disembark could not, because the explosion had destroyed the vessel's landing ramps. The burning LCI backed off the beach as the crew fought the fires in the forward compartments. The ship then began to list as water poured in through the shell holes. The 85 made it back to the Coast Guard manned attack transport, the USS Sandal Chase, with some 15 dead and 30 wounded still aboard. They offloaded these onto the Chase before the crew had to abandon their ship. The waters off Normandy slowly washed over the blood-stained decks as the LCI 85 settled deeper into the sea. The LCI 85 was one of the Coast Guard manned ships that participated in the landing in France on June 6, 1944. A date that proved to be one of the bloodiest of the Coast Guard's long history. By the grace of God, the LCI 492 survived the landings of the LCI Flotilla 10 that landed on Omaha Beach. 4 were lost, and all suffered casualties of both crew and ships, crews and troops. It was hard to realize that a little more than 12 hours earlier, I had attended Mass and received general absolution with the troops and crews of these LCIs on that pier in Weymouth, England. One sight all tin can sailors can take pride was the way these destroyers swept in close to Omaha Beach and delivered gunfire into the German positions and dueled with them from late morning until the afternoon. Destroyers were called in to furnish the only direct artillery support the infantry got on Omaha Beach. Sometime during the day, 2 German planes came out of nowhere and flew so close over us they could almost touch them. They didn't fire or drop anything on us, and they were gone in an instant. Also, as the day progressed, we started seeing the results of the battle on the beach. The rescue and recovery of the wounded and dead was assigned to the Coast Guard, who manned their 83-footers. These small wooden craft were all over in the rough seas doing their work. We also picked up survivors and dead from a life raft from the British destroyer that had hit a mine. We also circled an LST with the slogan "Bow Up," which had also hit a mine. Survivors were probably picked up by another ship. As the day drew to a close and darkness fell, 2 things remained to be mentioned. One were the German E-boats. These boats, similar to our PT boats, will infiltrate the invasion fleet and torpedo our ships. Secondly, the first night the Germans mounted an air raid on the invasion fleet. Never in my life, and probably will never see the display of firepower that was delivered by approximately 5,000 ships. It was like 1,000 Fourth of July rolled into one. Treasures filled the skies that looked like one curtain of fire. So much was thrown up in the air, they could hear a piece of metal hit the deck as they fell from the sky. This display of firepower was a fitting end to D-Day. The LCI 492 ended up at the end of D-Day in good shape. She was still afloat, and only our quartermaster had been slightly wounded. Back in the United States, as news of the invasion, church bells rang across the United States and Canada, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the Arctic to the Gulf Coast, not in triumph or celebration, but as a solemn reminder of national unity and a call to formal prayer. Special services were held in every church and synagogue in the land, and pews were jammed with worshipers. At the end of D-Day, back in the United States, family gathered around and listened to the radio as President Franklin Roosevelt, as he united all America in prayer. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor. These men were lately drawn from the ways of peace. They fight not for the lust of conquest, they fight to end conquest. They fight to liberate. They yearn before the end of battle, for the return to the haven of home. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom. Thank you.
Wow. Wow.
Wow.
Wow.
WWII.
Proud of your dad. We sure are. Now, Pete,
Yes.
you know, I know Charlie promised you a large honorarium to come for your speech. Charlie sometimes exaggerates, but like the others before you, you have earned the reward that we have for you, which is the highly coveted Central Pennsylvania World War II Roundtable mug, which I hope you'll find good use for. And I'm sure there are some people out there who may have some questions for you. And we'll try to field them. Anybody got a question? Okay. Speak it out loud or
Pete, could you just elaborate a little bit on your Pacific experience?
could you elaborate a little bit on your Pacific experience?
Like what?
On your Pacific
Yes.
experience?
Oh, let me comment on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, after the invasion of Normandy, I spent some time over in France and England, about maybe 11 months or so. Came back to the United States for a 30-day leave, and then I toured down to Philadelphia Navy Yard. It was great. I lived in Philadelphia. So that lasted about 2 weeks. And then I looked on the bulletin board, and it says, report to Boston to board the USS Columbus, which was a brand new heavy cruiser. And needless to say, we went up there, got the heavy cruiser, and we started heading toward the Pacific. The trip was pretty good. I was a radio man, so as we sailed down the East Coast, the message came across, you know, what our route was and where we were going. And it said, go down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, which we're about today. That's where all the Navy ships used to go to shake down their ships before they would go into sleep. Go down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and then through the Panama Canal, out to Hawaii, from Hawaii out to Okinawa, and Sept, China, and Shanghai, and end up in Japan. So anyway, that's I ended up in Japan. Some of the interesting things was going through the Panama Canal. I know everybody was ever through the Panama Canal, and it's quite an interesting experience. The Navy put a guide on their ship, and that whole day, it takes about 8 hours to go through the canal. And that whole day, I just sat up on the number 2 gun turret, and the guy was quite, you know, it's different things we passed. We saw the French equipment that Frenchmen started to build this and the whole bit. And then we go into the locks, which is very interesting. You go into the lock, you know, you're going from really the Atlantic to the Pacific. But you're not really going from east to west, you're going from west to east because the way the ISIS is designed. Anyway, so we go into the first lock. You go into a lower level, the door closes behind you, they fill it up with water like this, open that gate up, and then we go into the next one. And we sail a little bit, I think about four locks or so until you get to the Pacific. So it's all that, it's interesting to see the little, they call them mules, these little trains pulling these ships through the canal. And in fact, the canal is like, it's about 110 feet wide. And I'm a tour guide in the Battle of New Jersey, and New Jersey is 108 feet wide. So when New Jersey went through the Panama Canal, she had about a foot on each side. And so, but anyway, that's away from the story. So we went out to Hawaii. We ended up in Hawaii on Christmas Day. This is, of course, right after the war. And it was very interesting. And I spent Christmas Day there. And we went up to Pearl City, built up supplies, and we departed Hawaii, and we headed out through China. And to go to China, you go through the international date line. So when you go through the international date line, you skip a day. We went from the end of December to the 2nd of January. We skipped New Year's, we had a New Year's Day. We picked it up coming back though. So anyway, the Navy did us a nice dinner and everything else, and for the holiday. So anyway, we went to St. China, which was at that time north of China. It's on the coast of China, and St. Town had a lot of German influence, white Russians. But the reason we were there, the cruiser Columbus, with a couple of destroyers and marine detachments, was that China was starting becoming communist. And we were there to sort of show some force that we didn't want this to happen. Of course, that all failed and China became communist. So then we sailed down to Shanghai. Shanghai in 1945 or 46, whatever it was a disaster area. We were there in February. People were freezing on the streets. There was nothing, you know, people had nothing. In fact, we sailed up the Wangpu River, which is basically about as wide as a Delaware. We go up to Wangpu, and then you make a little short left, and Shanghai sits right there. So we anchored out in the middle of the river, and then what happens is these boats come out. We call them bumboats, because our people were actually living on these boats, and they didn't have any food or anything. What they did, they circled our ship. And then as we ate our meals and everything, we threw everything into the garbage can, we don't call it. And then we would go around, dumping all that into all these bumboats all around the ship. And nothing off the track, but a little interesting story. That's another tour guide in the battleship in Jersey. And I'm taking different tours. We took people from all over the world. And I'm going through the tour, and this Chinese fellow was there, and he couldn't speak English, and his daughter was there. And I said, "You're Chinese?" She said, "Yes." I said, "I was in Shanghai in that year." She said, "That was a really bad year, you know." I told her about what happened. And she said something to her father, and her father said, "I'm a hero." He was with one of those bungalows. That's about how many years later? And, but anyway, so we went to Shanghai, and we didn't do much there, and then we went up to Japan. And it was right after the war was over, of course. And one thing I was telling one of the fellows, we had a chance to go to Hiroshima where they dropped the atomic bomb. And being about 18, 19 years old, you know, I wasn't interested in seeing where they dropped the atomic bomb. And so I said to some of the guys, "You can take my Liberty spot, you can go." And today I still went, but I missed that opportunity. But anyway, so we went to Japan, and we had some really, I guess we just sat around there. And the interesting thing was, and I was telling Charlie this story, we went down to Sasebo, Japan. It was after the war, and we went to Sasebo is where the stronghold for all the Japanese submarines were. And that's where they were. And we were going to take these submarines out. It was prize of war now. And we take them out, they had stone crew on them, and the Germans would, the Japanese would tie cherry twigs on their periscope, you know, and you're supposed to see them selling passes as we took them out and down the sea. And they were drilling, they proved it all when they would blow them up, you know, with charging on the ship. So this one submarine, I think it was U-58, the captain said, "This is a submarine that sank the Indianapolis." Anybody familiar with the Indianapolis story? It was a real tragedy. It carried the atomic bomb to where the airplane was going to take it to Japan, and it's on its way back to the Philippines when it was sank by a Japanese submarine. The big thing about it was the Navy had lost track of that ship. Nobody knew where it was. They didn't know it was missing. And the ship was torpedoed, and the men, they suffered so many casualties in initial explosion, but they were out in the sea for all these days, and were dying in the life rafts, and the story goes, you know, the sharks were swimming around, they wouldn't touch them until they died. But anyway, so finally they spotted the ship, they tore it in, and they took the captain, and they charged in, even though the Navy had not followed through on where the ship was, they blamed it on the captain. And they finally cleared him, and then they even brought the Japanese commander of the submarine back, and they said, you know, even if the captain was exactly what it was, he would never save that submarine. The point I wanted to get to, as the captain said, "This is the submarine that sank the Indianapolis, and I don't want to see that sitting there 5 minutes afterwards." He said, "We're going to train our guns on it," and then they trained the guns on it, and our 8-inch guns, nothing blew out of the water. And so that was the end. So I told John, we sank the submarine that sank the Indianapolis. So anyway, and I guess that's about it. You know, we didn't do too much. There's a lot of application duty there. And then we headed back to the active state. And then from there, I got this story.
Was there any air cover for the troops when they went ashore on D-Day?
Was there much air cover for the troops landing on D-Day?
No, there was none. The weather was bad, and I'm glad you brought that up, because at Omaha Beach anyway, you know, the soldiers had a bad time at Omaha Beach. And one of the things was that the air cover, the bombing of Omaha Beach, the weather was so bad that the pilots were told to hold their bombs for maybe 2 or 3 seconds because they didn't want to hit Arab troops who were down there. By doing this, they overshot the area, and they bombed, all their bombs were dropped inland. Maybe a few hundred yards or whatever, but the ones dropped on the beach. So therefore, that bombing had no effect at all on the beach, in other words, on the Germans. The other thing was, there was a big, as Charlie mentioned, or somebody mentioned, we're going to use these tanks, a new type of tank, not new type of tank, but a new type of flotation device, so that when we bring these tanks into the beach, instead of being on LCT and dropping them off on the beach, they built these tanks with a flotation device around them that they can propel themselves onto the beach. And there were about 30 of them. And these were to act as artillery support for the people in Omaha Beach. Well, when they left the ship they were on to go by themselves, the seas were so rough they were swamped and down like a rock. So again, the men on Omaha Beach had no protection. You know, there was no artillery support. They just had their small arms and things like that. And nothing down on Omaha Beach. They were pinned down, and half the day, and General Bradley was going to call off the invasion at Omaha Beach because it was causing men, ships, everything else. And what they did, these destroyers, two or three destroyers out there. One was the Frankfurt, captained by Captain Zimmerman, and he recognized, he saw these soldiers on the beach, and they're all laying there. And he said to the crew, he said, they're dead, or if they get up, they're going to be dead. So they went in, these three destroyers went in, and they went in so close, turned broadside, sailed up and down that coast, almost touching bottom, and they silenced every German position on Omaha Beach that day. Not until late in the day were people able to move across Omaha Beach through the Navy destroyers.
Sir, I want to thank you for your talk this evening, and here we are in this beautiful church that we come to every month, and really appreciate being here. But I want to thank you for your comments at the beginning, and particularly at the end, where you were saying about before the invasion, the men were there, and it was overflowing onto the ships, and they were there at Catholic Mass to receive last rites, basically. And I'm sure probably the majority of them weren't even Catholic, but that's okay. And they knew that, you know, they might not make it through the war or even that day. And also the fact that Eisenhower invoked God and his blessings on the troops, and then at the end of your speech about how at the end of the day they thank God again for helping people get through the day. So, and today, I'm not here to preach, I'm just trying to say, not everybody speaks about God and how he hopes, we hope he blesses the endeavors that we go through. So, thank you.
I'm sorry, it sounded like it was good.
Yeah. We want to thank you, not only for your comments, especially for your comments on the service.
Can't hear you, Kurt.
And in a place like this, of course, it's a benefit for doing that.
Well, I say that every place. In fact, that's one of my other missions I had, is to spread the word of God around. It's interwoven there. Like, if you see things about the invasion of Normandy, and you hear General Eisenhower's speech, what they did, they cut out the difference. Where he says, you know, may God bless this mighty endeavor. It's not there. And all through, you know, the things, and that's one thing I want to show with this talk, is the faith that the men had in God, the officers had in God, the president had in God, and the people had in God. You don't see that today. And I'm glad you recognize that, and I like to spread that around. And that, like I say, remember the men of Normandy, but also remember God.
One thing I did remember, and you mentioned the Indianapolis. There's a book I just read called In Harm's Way, and the story is about the Indianapolis.
Yeah.
In harm's way.
1,196 on the crew. The Japanese sub sank them with 2 torpedoes. They went down in, I think, 10 minutes. It was that bad. 300 men died. Nobody knew where they were. They drifted out over the ocean for weeks. There was 800, 900 left. And when it was all over, only 300 survived. So 800 to 900 men died on the Indianapolis. And now I have a Valley question.
Pete, I just have 2 quick points that lead to a question. The first is just to remind us all that today's the anniversary in 1939, the beginning of World War II, when Poland was invaded by Germany and Russia, September 1st, 1939. But and England joined because of its treaty with Poland and had to go in early, obviously. But the thing that I wanted to mention is a lead-in as well, in relation to your talk, Pete. Stephen Ambrose's book on D-Day, which is a really good book, has one quote in it where he quoted a soldier, an American Army member who landed at D-Day. And he watched those 3 destroyers that you were talking about cruise up and down the beach when there was no aircraft bombardment against those German defenses. And the quote in the book that this American Army man made was, he said, "I was in the Army, but that day I was a Navy man."
Stephen Ambrose quoted on the beach of
Yeah, many of the Army men, when they were on the beach, and they saw these Navy destroyers coming in, many of them said that, "Thank God for the United States Navy."
Absolutely. Well, the one question I did want to ask, it's not something you addressed in the remarks, and I hope it doesn't take you too far afield, but I couldn't help but be curious if you'd be kind enough to tell us a little bit of what you did with your life when you came back to the States after the war.
So we had a terrific discussion with that during the war.
What's the rest of my life after the war?
So far.
Oh, so far. Here you go. I guess after the war, like many of us came back from World War II, we just came back to some, I guess, we just went through life in order. I was still young. I enlisted when I was 18 and 17. And out when I was 21. And so started looking around for a job, like most of them did. And then a friend of the family told me, "Why don't you take advantage of the GI Bill? You know, they'll send you to college and all this sort of thing." I don't want to go to college. Those days, you didn't go to college. So finally I decided to go to college. Me and my friend, we start, "You go to any college now?" This was pretty good. Harvard, Pennsylvania, you name it. Well, in those days, you never lived away from home. So what we did, I lived in Philadelphia, so I went out to St. Joe's College, Villanova University, LaSalle, in Pennsylvania, and University of Pennsylvania, and there was no SAT test in those days. What they did, they checked your high school academic record, and then you would be accepted or not accepted. So we picked out St. Joe's. It was really a good pick. I really good at picked it because it was closer to home. I could hop on a 61 trolley, the E-bus, and I'm right there with St. Joe's. So instead of going out to Philadelphia or these places, so that's why I picked St. Joe's. And like I said, it was the best pick I ever made. But it's a great college, great university now. And then from there, I graduated St. Joe's and went out to work. And I guess I was pretty successful. I became worked for Westinghouse Electric Corporation, became a purchase manager there, and the job was a great job. I traveled around the world, and it was just you're always doing something. It was a great job, so very satisfied with my job. And so I retired from Westinghouse, and then you retire, you don't know what to do, right? You're going to work every day. So I was climbing a wall, paint the basement, do so much paint and stuff like that. So I decided they had this thing where teach a literacy program where you teach people how to read. Oh, that sounds good. So I went to this place, volunteer. They taught me 6 weeks how to teach people how to read. And so we learned that, and then what you would do, you would meet people who want to learn English, but you would meet them like in a public place, like a library or something like that, one-on-one. So the first person I got, he wanted to learn English, want to talk to his kids, teach his kids and all that. Okay, fine, I'll set it up. I go figure all the paperwork. I go to one meeting. Next one didn't show up. Next fellow was a bus driver, tour bus driver, and he wanted to learn English. So I said, okay, so I drew some maps and things like that to show him what to do. So I said, how did you do it so far? He said, well, my wife helps me. Okay, so he came once, and he never came anymore. And then I had a third person. So I said, this isn't working. So I happened to get together with the ones who took the class with me, about 4 others. And they all had the same experience. People wouldn't show up anymore. This one person didn't have that problem. I said, how come you have that problem? He said, I'm teaching in prison. As far as their literary program goes, I don't know. So anyway, I looked around for something else to do, and I heard the Better Business Bureau had arbitrators, volunteer arbitrators. This won't all pay, but that was really interesting because I did most of the automobile cases. And what you would do if you had a problem with your automobile, you go to the Better Business Bureau, and if they think it's an arbitratable type problem, they will, take it up for arbitration. And then they pick the arbitrators about 3 or 4. So then we would sit in this room like a joke and hear both sides of the story, and then you would make a decision. It was really great for people don't know this. It was really great because the company had to adhere to the decision that we made, but the consumer, the customer, did not. And so that was very interesting. I did that for quite a while. And then they moved their office up to Trent or someplace like that, too far to go. So I said, what do I do now? So I saw an ad in the paper, tour guide needed for a battleship in New Jersey. This was back in 2002. Okay. And so I went up there and I volunteered, they told me I'd do tours and all that sort of thing. And I did that for many, many years, up until a few years ago when my wife got sick, and then I can't walk up down those ladders anymore to do so. But I still keep in contact and do certain things up there. But for about 10 years, 12 years, I did tour guides on the Battleship New Jersey. It's really, really interesting. And that's really an interesting historic site. It's the most decorated battleship in the United States Navy. And it's really great tour for anybody to take. Right there in the Camden waterfront, just go over to Ben Franklin Bridge, and right there, down to the waterfront, and there it is. And so I did that until, now I'm doing this thing about D-Day. I got involved in that. In fact, the person on the battleship, he asked me to write something for the ship's newspaper, and I told him about D-Day. And then, then I was down in the National D-Day Monument down in Virginia, Bedford, Virginia. Bedford, where the National Monument is because more people from that town per capita lost their life in order to be in any other place. So that's where the National D-Day Memorial is. And so I went down there, we had a ship reunion down there, and these people were up there and they were telling what the Army did, what the Air Force did, what these people did. And I was sitting there and I said to Tom, can I say something about the Navy? He said, sure. And I remember when I wrote up for the Battleship New Jersey newspaper, I got up there and I gave that talk, and they really liked it. In fact, the reporters came up and said, that's the first time we heard about what the Navy did. So from then on, I came home, and then one of my neighbors said, will you talk down at the Kiwanis Club in Atlantic City? I said, yes. So I went down there, and from there, I've been giving talks and all over the place. So that's my present hobby.
How about the next one? Rick Brennan.
If anybody would like to see it, enjoy it out there.